"This land is ours now," my daughter-in-law said as she changed the lock on my own ranch gate. "My name is Catherine Running Bear, a 58-year-old half-Cheyenne widow." I stood there, watching my son nod in agreement while his wife's father smiled coldly behind them. They thought they were stealing from a helpless old woman who had nowhere else to go. For 15 years, I'd worked this Colorado Territory ranch with my bare hands, buried my husband on the hill overlooking our pasture, and raised my son to respect the land his father died protecting. But they never expected what this frontier woman would do next, or that I had allies they couldn't even imagine. I know what it feels like when those closest to you choose greed over love. That moment when you realize family loyalty was just an illusion breaks something inside you. If you've ever had to stand up to people who underestimated your strength, let me know in the comments. Your courage might inspire someone else's fight. Something was wrong with the fence line. I crouched beside the wooden posts that marked the eastern boundary of our ranch, running my fingers over cuts that were too clean, too deliberate to be the work of weather or wandering cattle. Someone had been testing our barriers, seeing how easily they could be breached. In the gray light before dawn, the severed wire gleamed like a warning. My mother's people had taught me to read signs that others missed the way grass bent when someone tried to hide their tracks. The difference between accidental damage and purposeful destruction. This was purposeful. The question was why. Standing slowly, I pulled my woolen shawl tighter against the October chill and gazed across the land that had been home for 15 years. The Running Bear Ranch stretched toward the Rocky Mountains, where the peaks caught the first hints of sunrise in their snow-covered crowns. James had chosen this spot because it reminded him of the Dakota territories where we'd first met, when he was scouting for the army and I was translating between the Cheyenne and the soldiers who never quite trusted a woman who belonged to both worlds. Being half Cheyenne in Colorado territory meant walking a line as narrow as a mountain ridge. Too Indian for most white folks. Too white for some tribal members. Always having to prove I belonged somewhere. James never saw it that way to him. I was just Catherine, the woman who could track a wounded deer through a snowstorm and speak 3 languages fluently. He'd built this ranch as much for my mother's memory as for our future. A place where our children could grow up proud of both sides of their heritage. Now James was buried on the hill overlooking our pasture, and our son Tom seemed to have forgotten everything his father tried to teach him about respecting the land and the people who'd been here long before any of us. The sound of hooves on the mountain trail interrupted my brooding. 3 riders approached through the morning mist, and even at a distance, I recognized the straight-backed posture of my mother's brother, Chief Standing Wolf. My heart lifted despite my concerns about the fence. It had been too long since any of my mother's people had visited. I hurried back toward the ranch house, pausing to check on our horses in the barn. Duchess, our old mare, nickered softly as I filled her feed bucket. "Morning, girl," I murmured, scratching behind her ears. "We might have company for breakfast." By the time I reached the kitchen, I could hear Tom and Vicky stirring upstairs. Tom would need to leave for the Silver Creek mine soon, but there was time for a proper meal with our visitors. I started coffee brewing and began mixing batter for flapjacks, the familiar routine helping to settle my nerves about those cut fence wires. Standing Wolf dismounted in our front yard with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent 70 years on horseback. His weathered face creased into a smile as I stepped onto the porch. "Uncle?" I called in Cheyenne, using the respectful term for my mother's brother. "You honor our home with your presence." "Little Hawk," he replied, embracing me briefly. The name my mother's people had given me as a child always brought back memories of learning to track with him in the mountains, of understanding that survival meant reading the world around you with more than just your eyes. "Come inside," I said, switching to English for his 2 companions. "There's fresh coffee and breakfast enough for everyone." As we settled around the wooden table James had built with his own hands, Standing Wolf's expression grew serious. "There are changes coming to this valley. Little Hawk. The mining companies grow bolder, and some speak of expanding their claims. We have heard troubling talk in the trading posts. I poured coffee into tin cups, thinking of the cut fence wires. What kind of talk? Men who believe they can take what they want, when they want it, he said quietly. Sometimes the greatest dangers come not from strangers, but from those we trust most. Before I could ask him to explain that cryptic warning, the thunder of approaching hooves filled the air, multiple riders coming fast. Through the window, I saw a dust cloud much larger than 3 horses would create, and my blood ran cold. Standing Wolf was already on his feet, hand moving instinctively to his knife, expecting company. Little Hawk. I shook my head, remembering those deliberately cut fence wires. No one I know rides that hard unless there's trouble or unless they're bringing it. Have you ever had that gut feeling that someone close to you was planning something behind your back? Standing Wolf's warning about trusting those closest to us was about to prove more prophetic than I could have imagined? What do you think those riders were bringing to my doorstep that morning? The riders who thundered into our ranch yard weren't the drifters or prospectors I'd expected. These were well-dressed men on expensive horses, led by Samuel Caldwell, owner of the largest mining operation in the territory and Vicky's father. Behind him rode 2 men in dark suits and Tom, my own son, with his head hung low like a man riding to his own execution. Standing Wolf moved to my side as the group dismounted, his weathered hand resting on his knife handle. Little Hawk, he murmured in Cheyenne. Remember your mother's strength. Caldwell approached with the swagger of a man accustomed to getting his way. He was thick through the middle, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that had never looked at me with anything but contempt. To him, I was just another half-breed obstacle to progress. Mrs. Running Bear, he said with false courtesy. I trust you had a pleasant morning. We have business to discuss. What business would that be, Mr. Caldwell? One of the suited men stepped forward, unfolding official-looking papers. Ma'am, I'm Attorney Morrison from Denver. This property is now under new ownership. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's impossible. This ranch has been in my family for 15 years. Was in your family? Morrison corrected coldly. Your son Thomas has legally transferred ownership to his wife, who has sold the property to the Caldwell Mining Consortium. I turned to Tom, hoping to see confusion or protest in his eyes. Instead, I saw guilt and shame and the awful confirmation that my son had betrayed me. Tom, my voice came out as barely a whisper. He finally raised his head to meet my eyes, tears streaming down his face. Ma, I'm sorry. Vicky explained everything. The ranch is sitting on a silver vein worth thousands. We can't work it ourselves. This is my home, Thomas. This is where your father is buried. Vicky emerged from our house, dressed in her finest clothes as if attending a celebration rather than participating in theft. She moved to stand beside her father with a smile that never reached her eyes. Mother Running Bear, she said with false sweetness. I know this is difficult, but Tom and I have made a practical decision for our family's future. Caldwell pulled out a heavy new padlock and chain. Walking toward our front gate. The law is clear, Mrs. Running Bear. These documents are properly filed with the territorial government. He snapped the new lock onto our gate with a sound that echoed across the mountains. You have until noon to gather your personal belongings and leave. Standing Wolf stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of his years. This is sacred ground. The spirits of this woman's ancestors watch over this place. Caldwell barely glanced at him. The territorial government doesn't recognize Indian claims. Old man. I looked at my son, searching for any trace of the boy I'd raised to respect both sides of his heritage. Tom, your father would be ashamed. The words hit him like a slap, but Vicky whispered something in his ear, and his face hardened again. I'm sorry, Ma, but this is what's best for everyone. as I stood in my own front yard, locked out of the home I'd built with my own hands. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. These people had made a terrible mistake. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman. They had no idea what a half-Cheyenne widow was capable of when her family turned against her. Have you ever watched your own child choose someone else over you, knowing you sacrificed everything for their future, standing there, locked out of my own home by my son's betrayal? I felt something break inside me that I didn't know could be repaired. But tell me, what would you have done when the people you loved most treated you like a stranger? Standing Wolf's weathered hand on my shoulder was the only thing keeping me anchored as I watched the Caldwell men ride away from what had been my home just an hour before. The new padlock on my own gate gleamed like a fresh wound in the morning sunlight. "Little Hawk," my uncle said quietly in Cheyenne. "Your mother's spirit speaks through the wind. She says this injustice will not stand." I turned to face him, drawing strength from his calm presence. "Uncle, I need your wisdom. In the old ways, what would be done when someone steals another's lodge?" His dark eyes studied my face carefully. "First, we would seek the truth of what happened. Then we would gather the counsel of those who know right from wrong. Finally, we would demand justice, not revenge, but balance restored to the world. And if the thieves refused to make things right," a small smile creased his weathered features, "then we would remind them why it is unwise to anger the spirits of this land." We rode into Silver Creek together, Standing Wolf and his two companions flanking me like an honor guard. The mining town bustled with its usual morning activity, prospectors heading up into the mountains, supply wagons rumbling down the main street, and the constant sound of hammers and saws as new buildings rose to house the growing population. Our first stop was Doc Martha Sullivan's clinic, a sturdy log building near the center of town. Martha had been one of the few people to welcome me openly when James and I first settled in the territory, as an Irish immigrant and one of the few female doctors west of Denver. She understood what it meant to fight for respect in a man's world. The bell above her door chimed as we entered, and Martha looked up from grinding herbs behind her counter. Her red hair was streaked with silver now, but her green eyes were as sharp as ever. "Catherine Running Bear," she said warmly, then noticed my expression. "What's wrong? Dear, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse than that, Martha. I've seen my son sell my ranch out from under me." I explained the morning's events while she listened with growing outrage. "That's not possible," she said firmly. "Property law in this territory requires the original owner's signature on any transfer documents. You'd have to sign the papers yourself." "That's what I thought. But they had official documents from Denver." Martha wiped her hands on her apron and reached for her coat. "Then we need to see those documents. Judge Morrison is holding court today, the real Judge Morrison. Not that snake oil lawyer who came with Caldwell. Henry Morrison has been the circuit judge for this territory for 12 years. And he knows every legal document that comes through his court." We found Judge Morrison in the back room of McKenna's saloon, which doubled as the courthouse when he was in town. He was a tall, lean man with silver whiskers and the kind of steady gaze that made dishonest men squirm. "Mrs. Running Bear," he said, rising respectfully when we entered. "I heard there was some commotion at your ranch this morning. Something about property transfer." I handed him the copies of the documents that Caldwell's lawyer had left behind. Judge Morrison adjusted his spectacles and studied them carefully, his frown deepening with each page. "These are forgeries," he said finally, his voice hard as granite. "Good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. Look here." He pointed to an official seal at the bottom of one page. "This seal is from the territorial office in Colorado Springs, but it's 6 months out of date. They changed the design last spring after some documents were stolen." Standing Wolf leaned forward. "Stolen documents. A whole batch of them went missing from the territorial office. Blank deeds, transfer papers, mining claims, all with official seals that could be filled in later." Judge Morrison set the papers down with disgust. I've been watching for them to surface. Looks like we found where they ended up. Martha's face was flushed with anger. So Tom didn't actually sign anything legal? Oh, he signed something, the judge said grimly. But whatever he signed, it has no legal standing. The real question is whether he knew these documents were fraudulent or if he was deceived as well. I thought about the guilt in my son's eyes, the way he couldn't look at me directly. I think he knew something was wrong, but Vicky convinced him it was legitimate. The Caldwell family has been pushing hard to expand their mining operations. Judge Morrison continued. They've made offers on several properties in this area, but most of the owners have refused to sell. This looks like their way of taking what they can't buy legally. Standing Wolf spoke up, his voice carrying the authority of a tribal elder. In my people's law, when someone takes what does not belong to them, the whole community has the right to demand justice. Judge Morrison nodded approvingly. Territorial law isn't much different. Chief, the problem is proving fraud and getting the territorial marshal to act against someone as powerful as Samuel Caldwell. What do we need? I asked, feeling hope stir in my chest for the first time since morning. Evidence. The judge replied. Proof that Caldwell knew these documents were forged. Testimony from anyone who might have witnessed the fraud. And most importantly, we need to move fast before he can legitimize his claim through other means. Martha grabbed my hand. Catherine, there's something else you should know. I've been treating several miners who've gotten sick working the new claims up north. The symptoms suggest they're being exposed to more than just silver ore. If Caldwell is willing to forge documents to get your land, I'd bet my medical license he's not being honest about what he's really mining. As we left the makeshift courthouse, I felt the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. This wasn't just about my ranch, it was about a pattern of corruption that threatened the entire community. Standing Wolf walked beside me in comfortable silence until we reached our horses. Then he spoke quietly in Cheyenne. The hunt begins. Little Hawk? But remember, the wisest hunters know when to track alone and when to gather the pack. I looked back toward the mountains where my ranch lay under Caldwell's illegal claim. Then at the town where honest people were being deceived and poisoned for profit. Then it's time to gather the pack. Uncle, these wolves have been running free too long. Have you ever felt that moment when everything seems lost? But then you realize you're not as alone as you thought. Finding out those documents were forged gave me the first spark of hope I'd felt since watching my son betray me. But tell me, when someone powerful tries to destroy you, do you fight back alone or do you gather your allies first? The sacred fire crackled in the center of Standing Wolf's lodge as tribal elders gathered in a circle that had been forming for generations. I sat cross-legged on a buffalo hide, the only woman present. But my mixed blood and the gravity of the situation had earned me a place in this council of wisdom. Speak, Little Hawk, Standing Wolf said in Cheyenne, his weathered hands folded in his lap. Tell the grandfathers what has been done to you. I told them everything, the forged documents, Tom's betrayal, Caldwell's theft of my land, and the larger pattern of corruption that Judge Morrison had helped us uncover. The elders listened in silence, their faces growing darker with each detail. Old Bearclaw, the eldest among them at nearly 80, spoke first. This Caldwell takes not just land, but honor. He digs where the spirits have warned us never to dig. In the old days, such a man would face the judgment of all the tribes. What do you mean? Grandfather, I asked. Bearclaw's grandson, Swift Eagle, leaned forward with haunted eyes. I worked in Caldwell's northern claims before the sickness took hold. The rocks glow with an evil light, especially at night. The old ones call it Devil Rock metal, cursed by angry spirits. The water runs strange colors, and men who handle it too long waste away like autumn leaves. My blood chilled as I remembered stories my grandmother had told me about cursed metals that the spirits hid deep in the earth for good reason. How many have died, 3 of our young men, and more, growing sick each day. But Caldwell pays double wages to keep them working. Tells them it's just mountain fever. Standing Wolf's face was grim. Our ancestors knew to avoid certain places, certain stones that brought death to those who disturbed them. This white man's greed blinds him to ancient wisdom. After the council ended with promises of testimony and support, I rode back to town with Doc Martha, who had been waiting at the edge of the tribal lands. Her face was pale with worry. "Catherine, I've examined 8 more miners since this morning," she said without preamble. All showing the same symptoms, wasting sickness. Strange burns on their hands. Coughing up blood. Whatever they're digging up there, it's killing them slowly. The elders call it devil rock. They say the spirits cursed it to keep men from disturbing it. Martha nodded grimly. Spirits or science, the result is the same. These men are dying, and Caldwell knows it. We rode to the Silver Creek mine, where the foreman McGreedy greeted us with suspicion until Martha explained our mission. His weathered face grew troubled as we spoke. There's been talk," he admitted. "Men working the northern claims have been falling sick, but Caldwell's paying blood money to keep them quiet. Says it's just altitude sickness. But I've worked these mountains 30 years and never seen anything like it. We need men willing to speak the truth in court," I said. McCready studied my face. "You're going up against Caldwell. You'll need more than sick miners and tribal testimony. You'll need Colonel Harrison, the territorial mining inspector. He's been sniffing around Caldwell's operations, but he needs proof." That evening, I sat in Martha's kitchen writing letters by lamplight while Standing Wolf cleaned his rifle across from me. "Uncle, are you preparing for war?" I asked. "I am preparing for justice. Little Hawk." The spirits of the earth cry out for balance to be restored. Martha set down her coffee cup with determination. "We have the tribal elders, the sick miners, Judge Morrison, and hopefully Colonel Harrison. But Catherine, we need one more ally." "Who?" "Tom. He's the key to proving those documents were forged. If he testifies that he was deceived, it could destroy Caldwell's entire scheme." My chest tightened. Tom chose his side. Standing Wolf looked at me with ancient, wise eyes. "Your son is lost in a storm of lies. Little Hawk, sometimes love means guiding the lost one home, even when they fight the path." Outside, mountain winds carried the promise of snow and change. Tomorrow would bring the hardest conversation of my life, not with my betrayer, but with my lost son. Colonel Harrison arrived on the morning train from Denver. A tall man with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to cutting through lies to find truth. Judge Morrison had arranged for us to meet in the back room of McKenna's saloon, away from Caldwell's watchful eyes. "Mrs. Running Bear," the colonel said, removing his hat respectfully. "I've been investigating Samuel Caldwell's operations for 6 months. Your letter provided pieces of a puzzle I've been trying to solve." I spread the forged documents across the scarred wooden table. "These papers stole my ranch, Colonel, but they're part of something much larger." Colonel Harrison examined each document with a magnifying glass, making notes in a leather-bound journal. "The territorial seal is outdated. The paper stock is wrong. And the filing numbers don't match our Denver records. This is sophisticated fraud, Mrs. Running Bear. Someone with access to government offices helped create these." Doc Martha leaned forward. "Colonel, I've documented 12 cases of miners showing symptoms consistent with exposure to whatever Caldwell is really mining up north. They're calling it silver, but men are dying." "I've seen the northern claims," Harrison said grimly. "The ore glows with an unnatural light, and the waste rock is being dumped directly into Silver Creek. If this continues, it could poison the water supply for the entire valley." Standing Wolf, who had been silent until now, spoke in his careful English. My people have words for such places ground that should not be disturbed. The spirits placed warnings there for good reason. Colonel Harrison nodded respectfully. Traditional knowledge often proves wiser than modern greed, Chief, but to stop Caldwell legally, I need testimony from someone who can prove he knew these documents were fraudulent. That afternoon, I found Tom at the Silver Creek mine, emerging from his shift with coal dust on his face and guilt in his eyes. He saw me waiting by the mine entrance and stopped short, as if he'd been expecting this confrontation but dreading it nonetheless. "Ma," he said quietly, not meeting my gaze. "Thomas," I kept my voice steady, though my heart was breaking. "We need to talk." We walked to a quiet spot overlooking the valley, where the afternoon sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and shadow. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I know what you're thinking," Tom finally said. "That I betrayed you. That I chose money over family." "Did you?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Vicky said the mining company would make us rich, that we could take care of you better with the money from selling the ranch. She said you were getting too old to manage such a large property. And you believed her. I wanted to believe her." Tom's shoulders sagged. "Ma, I've been working in those northern claims. I've seen what that devil rock does to men. I've been having nightmares, wondering if I'm slowly dying too." My anger began to soften into something more complex, pity mixed with love, disappointment tempered by understanding. "Tom, those documents Caldwell used to take our ranch, they're forgeries. You didn't legally sign anything." His head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "I mean your wife's father is a criminal, and he's been using you to legitimize his theft." I pulled out copies of the forged papers. "Colonel Harrison, the territorial mining inspector, confirmed it this morning." Tom studied the documents with growing horror. "But Vicky said her father's lawyer handled everything legally. She said it was all proper." "Your wife lied to you, son. The question now is whether you're going to help us stop her father before more people die, or whether you're going to keep being his unwitting accomplice." The wind whistled through the mountain passes as Tom wrestled with the truth. In the distance, I could see smoke rising from Caldwell's northern claims, where men were slowly dying for devil rock they thought was silver. "What do you need me to do, Ma?" For the first time in days, I felt hope stirring in my chest. My son wasn't lost after all. He had just been wandering in the dark, waiting for someone to show him the way home. Word spread through Silver Creek like wildfire on a dry mountainside. By evening, McKenna's saloon was packed with miners, ranchers, shopkeepers, and their families, people who had never gathered in one place before, united by a common enemy and a shared sense of justice betrayed. I stood at the front of the room beside Colonel Harrison, Doc Martha, and Judge Morrison, looking out at faces weathered by frontier life but burning with righteous anger. Standing Wolf sat in the front row with several tribal elders, their presence lending gravity to our cause. "Friends and neighbors," Judge Morrison began, his voice carrying easily through the crowded room. "We're here tonight because we've discovered that Samuel Caldwell has been systematically defrauding this community, poisoning our people, and corrupting our territorial government." A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. In the back, I spotted several of Caldwell's foremen, no doubt there to report back to their boss. But I wasn't worried. Let them hear every word. We had nothing to hide. Colonel Harrison stepped forward, his military bearing commanding immediate attention. "I've been investigating Caldwell's operations for months. The evidence shows a pattern of document forgery, illegal mining practices, and deliberate endangerment of workers' lives." "What about our jobs?" called out a voice from the middle of the room. "Caldwell pays better than anyone else in the territory." Doc Martha rose to answer. "He pays blood money, Patrick O'Malley. I've got 12 men in various stages of poisoning from that devil rock he's mining." "How much is your life worth?" Patrick, a burly Irishman with 3 children to feed. Looked uncomfortable but didn't back down. Easy enough to say when you've got other work, Doc. Some of us don't have choices. It was Tom who answered, stepping forward from where he'd been standing against the wall. His voice shook slightly, but it carried conviction. Patrick, I worked those northern claims for 2 months. I can feel the sickness starting in my bones. And I've seen good men waste away to nothing. Caldwell knows exactly what he's doing to us. The room fell silent. Tom's testimony carried weight because everyone knew he'd been part of Caldwell's inner circle through his marriage to Vicky. My wife's father used forged documents to steal my mother's ranch, Tom continued, his voice growing stronger. He's been planning to expand his poisonous operations onto her land, and probably onto yours next. If we don't stop him now, this whole valley will be dead ground within 5 years. Old McCready, the mine foreman, stood up slowly. I've been mining these mountains for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like what's happening at those northern claims. The rock itself seems cursed, and the men who work it. He shook his head grimly. It's not natural. What's happening to them? Standing Wolf rose with the dignity of his 70 years. In the old tongue, we call such places ground where spirits weep. Our ancestors knew to avoid them. This man Caldwell digs where he should not dig, takes what should not be taken. What do you need from us? Asked Sarah McKenna, the saloon owner's wife. Most of us aren't lawyers or government officials, Colonel Harrison answered. We need witnesses, men willing to testify about conditions in Caldwell's mines, women willing to speak about how the poisoned water has affected their families, shopkeepers who've seen the forged documents, everyone who's been touched by Caldwell's corruption. And we need you to stand together, I added, finding my voice. Caldwell's power comes from keeping us isolated, making us feel like we can't fight back. But look around this room, ranchers, miners, tribal members, business owners. Together, we're stronger than any mining company. Judge Morrison pulled out his pocket watch. Caldwell has called for a meeting tomorrow morning at the territorial office. He wants to formalize his claim on the Running Bear Ranch and announce his expansion plans. That's where we make our stand. What if he has the territorial officials in his pocket too? Someone called out. Then we'll find out who serves justice and who serves gold, Colonel Harrison replied grimly. But I've sent word to the governor's office. If local officials won't act, territorial marshals will. As the meeting broke up, people approached me one by one offering testimony, support, even places to stay if Caldwell tried to retaliate. Mrs. Chen from the general store pressed a small bag of supplies into my hands. For strength tomorrow, she said in her careful English. Tom waited until the crowd had mostly dispersed before approaching me. Ma, I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to make it right. You already have, son, I replied, touching his shoulder. Your father would be proud of the man you're becoming. Outside, the mountain wind carried the scent of snow and change. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation we'd been building toward. But tonight, for the first time in days, I felt the power of a community united in purpose. Caldwell had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated what happens when you threaten not just one person's home, but an entire way of life. The territorial office in Silver Creek had never seen such a crowd. By 9 o'clock in the morning, nearly 50 people had gathered outside the small log building that served as the local government seat. Samuel Caldwell arrived in his expensive carriage with 3 lawyers from Denver, clearly expecting to conduct his business in private. Instead, he found Judge Morrison, Colonel Harrison, and half the town waiting for him. What's the meaning of this circus? Caldwell demanded, his face flushing red as he climbed down from his carriage. I arranged a private meeting with the territorial clerk. And you'll have it, Judge Morrison replied calmly. but territorial law allows for public witness when fraud is suspected. These people have a right to hear what you have to say. Caldwell's eyes found mine in the crowd, and I saw recognition flare there along with something that might have been fear. Mrs. Running Bear, I thought you'd be long gone by now. This is still my home, Mr. Caldwell, I replied evenly. And these are still my neighbors. We're not going anywhere. Inside the cramped office, Territorial Clerk Williams looked nervous as he shuffled through the papers on his desk. He was a thin, pale man who'd always struck me as more concerned with keeping his job than doing it properly. Mr. Caldwell, Williams began hesitantly. You wanted to formalize the transfer of the Running Bear property and discuss expansion permits for your northern claims. That's correct. Caldwell's lead lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Brennan, placed a leather portfolio on the desk. All the necessary documentation is in order. Colonel Harrison stepped forward. Before we proceed, I'd like to examine those documents as a representative of the Territorial Mining Authority. Brennan's eyes narrowed. On whose authority, Harrison produced an official letter bearing the Territorial Governor's seal. Governor Evans has authorized a full investigation into mining practices in this district. That includes reviewing all property transfers and mining permits. I watched Caldwell's face as Harrison spread the documents across the clerk's desk. The colonel's magnifying glass moved methodically across each page while the room held its breath. Interesting, Harrison murmured after several minutes. Mr. Williams, when did you receive these documents? The clerk consulted his ledger with shaking hands. They were filed last Tuesday morning. Sir? And yet, Harrison continued, holding up one of the papers to the light. This territorial seal is dated 6 months ago, and the paper stock matches a batch that was reported stolen from the Colorado Springs office last spring. Brennan started to object, but Harrison cut him off. Furthermore, the filing numbers don't exist in our central registry. These documents are sophisticated forgeries. A murmur ran through the crowded room. Caldwell's face had gone pale, but he rallied quickly. That's impossible. My son-in-law signed those papers willingly. The transfer is completely legitimate. Is it? Tom stepped forward from where he'd been standing near the back. Because I never signed anything that looked like these documents. Mr. Caldwell. The room fell silent as Tom approached the desk. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was steady. The papers you showed me were different, simpler forms that you said were just to help Ma with her taxes. You never mentioned selling the ranch or transferring ownership. Vicky, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. Tom, you're confused. You know exactly what those papers were for. No, Vicky, Tom replied, turning to face his wife. I know what you and your father told me they were for, but I've seen the real documents now, and they're not what I signed. Doc Martha stepped forward with her medical bag. And while we're talking about deception, Mr. Caldwell, I have 12 miners here who'd like to discuss the working conditions at your northern claims. She opened her bag and pulled out a collection of glass vials filled with water samples. These are from Silver Creek, taken at various points downstream from your mining operations. Notice the unusual coloration that's from the devil rock you've been telling people is silver ore? Caldwell's lawyer tried to interrupt. These allegations are supported by Territorial Mining Authority findings, Colonel Harrison interrupted, producing another document. I've had assayers examine samples from Caldwell's northern claims. The ore contains dangerous levels of radioactive materials that pose severe health risks to miners and surrounding communities. Radioactive Clerk Williams looked confused. Cursed rock, Standing Wolf said simply from his place near the door. Rock that kills those who disturb it. My people have known of such places for generations. Caldwell finally exploded. I won't stand here and listen to superstitious nonsense from a bunch of— Careful, Mr. Caldwell, Judge Morrison warned quietly. You're already facing charges of fraud and endangerment. You don't want to add territorial racial intimidation to the list. The mining magnate's mouth snapped shut, but his eyes blazed with fury. I could see him calculating, looking for a way out of the trap that was closing around him. That's when Vicky made her move. "This is all lies," she shouted suddenly. "My husband is being manipulated by his crazy half-breed mother. She's the one who forged those documents to make my father look guilty." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. And I realized that even cornered, the Caldwell family wasn't finished fighting. Vicky's accusation echoed through the territorial office like a gunshot. And for a moment, I felt the weight of every prejudice I'd faced as a half-Cheyenne woman in a white man's world. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, and I could see doubt creeping into some faces. But I had been preparing for this moment my entire life. "Mrs. Caldwell," I said quietly, using Vicky's married name with deliberate emphasis. "That's a serious accusation. I hope you have evidence to support it." Vicky's eyes gleamed with desperate triumph. "Everyone knows half-breeds can't be trusted. You probably learned forgery from some Indian trader, just like you learned to lie and cheat to get what you want." The silence that followed was deafening. Standing Wolf's face had turned to stone, and I could feel the tension radiating from the tribal elders behind him. But before anyone could respond, Tom stepped forward. "Vicky," he said, his voice carrying a pain that cut through the room like a blade. "That's my mother you're talking about. The woman who raised me, who worked 3 jobs to buy our home, who never lied to me about anything until you came into our lives." "Tom, she's manipulating you." "No." His voice was stronger now. "You manipulated me. You and your father." He turned to face the room. "I want everyone to hear this. My wife has been planning to steal my mother's ranch for over a year. I found letters in our bedroom correspondence between her and her father about how to get control of the property." Vicky's face went white. "Those letters don't prove anything." "Don't they?" Tom reached into his jacket and pulled out a small bundle of papers. "Because I brought them with me." Colonel Harrison took the letters and began reading aloud. "Dearest Papa," he began. "Tom is finally starting to trust me more than his mother. I think I can convince him to sign the property transfer papers within the month. He's so eager to please me that he doesn't ask too many questions about the legal details." A murmur of disgust rippled through the crowd. Harrison continued reading. "The old half-breed won't know what hit her until it's too late. Once we have the ranch, we can expand the northern mining operations without interference from tribal lands or environmental concerns." "That's enough," Caldwell said sharply. But Harrison kept reading. "I've been gradually making her feel unwelcome in her own home, moving her belongings, changing decorations, making her feel like she doesn't belong. Tom barely notices because he's so focused on keeping me happy. Sometimes I think these frontier men are even more gullible than Eastern gentlemen." The room erupted in angry voices. "Mrs." Chen from the general store stood up, her face flushed with indignation. "You evil girl. How could you treat your husband's mother that way?" But I wasn't finished. I reached into my own bag and pulled out the ace I'd been saving for exactly this moment. "Territorial Clerk Williams," I said formally, "I'd like to present evidence that Mr. Caldwell has been involved in document forgery for longer than just my case." I handed Williams a leather folder that Standing Wolf had given me that morning. "These are copies of mining claims filed by various tribal members over the past 2 years, claims that were mysteriously rejected or transferred to Caldwell's company despite being properly submitted." Colonel Harrison examined the documents with growing amazement. "Mrs. Running Bear, where did you get these?" "My uncle Standing Wolf has been keeping records of every interaction between our people and the territorial government," I replied. "He may not read English perfectly, but he understands injustice in any language. He's been documenting Caldwell's pattern of fraud for months." Standing Wolf stood with quiet dignity. "White man's law says paper makes truth, so we keep paper. We show truth." Williams looked through the documents with shaking hands. "These filing numbers..." They match claims that were supposedly never submitted. But here are the original copies with proper dates and signatures. Which means, Judge Morrison said grimly, that someone in the territorial office has been altering or destroying legitimate claims to benefit Caldwell's operations. All eyes turned to Williams, whose face had gone gray. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Caldwell said he was just consolidating claims to prevent disputes. He paid me to modify some paperwork. The confession hung in the air like a death sentence. Caldwell made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. This is all circumstantial evidence and hearsay from unreliable sources. Mr. Caldwell, Colonel Harrison interrupted. You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, bribery of territorial officials, and endangerment of public health. Mrs. Caldwell, you're also under arrest as an accessory to fraud and conspiracy. As the territorial marshals who had been waiting outside came in to make the arrests, Vicky turned to Tom with tears streaming down her face. Tom, please. I did it for us, for our future together. My son looked at his wife with a sadness that seemed to age him 10 years. Vicky, you did it for greed. There's a difference. As they led the Caldwells away in chains, Judge Morrison approached me with a document bearing the territorial seal. Mrs. Running Bear, he said formally, by the authority vested in me by the Territory of Colorado, I hereby restore full ownership of the Running Bear Ranch to you, with apologies from the territorial government for this miscarriage of justice. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers, but I felt only a quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, but the real victory was seeing my son stand up for what was right, even when it cost him everything. 3 days after the arrests, I stood in my own kitchen again, watching the sunrise paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and rose. The new padlock was gone from my gate, replaced by the familiar old latch that James had installed 15 years ago. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever be quite the same again. Tom sat at the kitchen table, staring into his coffee cup like he might find answers in its dark depths. The divorce papers had been filed yesterday. Vicky's final betrayal had destroyed whatever love might have survived her greed. My son looked older, worn down by the weight of his choices. But there was something cleaner about him now, as if a poison had been drawn from his system. The territorial marshal came by this morning, I said, pouring myself coffee and settling across from him. Caldwell's northern claims have been officially shut down. They're bringing in specialists from Denver to clean up the contaminated areas. Tom nodded without looking up. What about the miners who got sick? Colonel Harrison says the territorial government will provide medical care and compensation. Doc Martha is working with doctors from Colorado Springs to develop treatments. I paused, studying my son's profile. She says you should be examined too, given how long you worked those claims. I deserve whatever happens to me, Ma. No, you don't. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. You made mistakes, son. But you were deceived by people who should have loved and protected you. There's a difference between being foolish and being evil. A knock at the door interrupted us. Standing Wolf entered without ceremony, as was his way, followed by Judge Morrison and several tribal elders. They carried themselves with the formal dignity reserved for important occasions. Little Hawk, Standing Wolf said in Cheyenne, we come to speak of balance restored. Judge Morrison stepped forward with an official document. Mrs. Running Bear, the Territorial Court has reached final judgments in the Caldwell case. Samuel Caldwell has been sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. Victoria Caldwell received 15 years. Clerk Williams will serve 5 years and has been permanently barred from territorial service. And the stolen lands, I asked. All fraudulent claims have been voided and returned to their rightful owners, the judge replied. Additionally, The court has ordered the Caldwell estate to pay restitution to affected parties. Your ranch improvements and the medical costs for poisoned miners will be fully covered. Standing Wolf spoke again, this time in English for everyone's benefit. The tribal council has voted. We offer Tom Running Bear a place among us. To learn the old ways of healing the land, healing himself. Tom looked up for the first time all morning, surprise flickering in his eyes. You would accept me after what I helped do, Old Bear Claw, leaning heavily on his walking stick, answered with the wisdom of his 80 years. A man who admits his mistakes and seeks to make them right is worth 10 men who never make mistakes because they never try to do anything worthwhile. The offer stands. Standing Wolf continued. The spirits say you have work to do, cleaning the poison from the earth that was disturbed. It will take years, but it is good work. Necessary work. Tom was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'd be honored, if you'll have me. Later that afternoon, Doc Martha arrived with news from town. The community meeting voted unanimously, she announced with satisfaction. We're establishing a mining safety board with representatives from the tribal council, the miners' union, and local ranchers. No more operations like Caldwell's will be allowed in this valley. As evening fell, I walked out to the small cemetery on the hill where James was buried. The headstone was simple, James Running Bear. Beloved husband and father, 1,825 to 1,882 inches. I knelt beside the grave and placed my hand on the sun-warmed stone. It's over, my love, I whispered. Our land is safe. Our son is finding his way back to honor. And the community is stronger than ever. You would be proud of what we've built here. The wind through the mountain pines seemed to carry his voice. I always was proud. Catherine, of the land, of our son, and most of all, of you. As I walked back toward the house, I could see Tom and Standing Wolf sitting on the porch, talking quietly in the gathering dusk. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, balance had been restored to our small corner of the world. The Running Bear Ranch was home again. 6 months later, Silver Creek had transformed into something I barely recognized, and yet it felt more like home than ever before. The changes weren't just visible in the cleaned-up mining sites or the new safety regulations posted at every claim entrance. They lived in the way people greeted each other on the street. The way Anglo miners now sought advice from tribal elders about reading the land. The way the community had learned to see strength in diversity rather than threat. The morning sun found me standing outside McKenna's saloon, which had been converted into the headquarters of the new Colorado Territory Mining Safety Commission. Inside, Tom worked alongside Swift Eagle and 2 former Caldwell miners, reviewing applications for new mining permits under the strict guidelines that now governed all operations in our district. Mrs. Running Bear, called Patrick O'Malley, the Irish miner who'd questioned our cause at that first community meeting. He approached with his hat in his hands and genuine warmth in his eyes. I wanted to thank you again. The Safety Commission approved my application for a small silver claim up Willow Creek. Clean silver, properly assayed, with tribal blessing for the location. That's wonderful. Patrick, how's your family? Thriving. Thanks to you and Doc Martha. My youngest, little Molly, she's been learning Cheyenne words from Chief Standing Wolf's granddaughter. Says she wants to be a bridge between peoples. Just like you. The idea of children growing up seeing cultural cooperation as natural rather than unusual filled my heart with hope. This was the legacy I wanted to leave, not just a restored ranch, but a transformed community. Doc Martha emerged from her expanded clinic, wiping her hands on her apron. The territorial government had funded a proper medical facility after the Caldwell scandal, and she now worked with a team that included a traditional Cheyenne healer and a specialist in mining-related illnesses. Catherine, I have news from Denver, she said, her eyes bright with excitement. Governor Evans wants to use Silver Creek as a model for mining communities throughout the territory. They're sending a delegation next month to study our safety protocols and cultural cooperation programs. What does that mean for us? It means we're proving that Anglo and Native communities can work together for everyone's benefit. The territorial legislature is considering new laws based on what we've accomplished here. As we walked toward the general store, I noticed the changes that had become part of daily life. The trading post now carried goods from both Anglo and Native artisans. Children played games that mixed European and Cheyenne traditions. The school that had been built with restitution money from the Caldwell estate taught classes in both English and Cheyenne, with history lessons that honored all the peoples who had shaped this land. Mrs. Chen waved from her store window, where a sign in 3 languages, English, Chinese, and Cheyenne, welcomed customers. The diversity that Caldwell had seen as weakness to exploit had become our greatest strength. At the cemetery, I found Tom kneeling beside his father's grave, carefully tending the wildflowers that had been planted around the headstone. His work with the land restoration project had bronzed his skin and strengthened his hands, but more importantly, it had restored something in his spirit that I'd feared was lost forever. The contaminated areas are finally showing signs of recovery, he said without looking up. Standing Wolf says the spirits are returning to places they'd fled. The water runs clear again, and we found deer tracks near the old northern claims yesterday. Your father would be proud, I said, settling beside him on the grass. I hope so. Ma, I have a long way to go to make up for what I did. You're not making up for anything anymore, son. You're building something new. That evening, the community gathered for our monthly council meeting, a tradition that had grown from the crisis that brought us together. Anglo ranchers sat beside Cheyenne elders, miners next to shopkeepers, all working together to solve problems and plan for the future. As I looked around the circle of faces illuminated by lamplight, I thought about how much had changed since that morning when I'd found cut fence wires and sensed trouble coming. The trouble had come, worse than I'd imagined. But it had also brought transformation beyond my wildest dreams. We'd learned that a community united by justice and mutual respect was stronger than any corporation, more enduring than any individual greed, and more powerful than the prejudices that had once divided us. The Running Bear Ranch was no longer just my home, it had become the heart of something larger, a symbol of what the American frontier could become when people chose cooperation over conquest. 1 year to the day after Caldwell had changed the locks on my gate, Silver Creek hosted its first annual Frontier Justice Festival. The irony wasn't lost on anyone what had begun as one man's greed had transformed into a celebration of community strength and cultural cooperation. The festival grounds stretched across the meadow between my ranch and the town, with booths representing every family and culture that called our valley home. Cheyenne artisans displayed beadwork alongside Irish quilters. Chinese merchants offered delicacies next to German bakers. Children ran between the stalls speaking a mixture of languages, their laughter the sound of a future none of us had dared imagine a year ago. Colonel Harrison, now permanently assigned to oversee territorial mining reform, stood at the podium addressing a crowd that included officials from Denver and representatives from 3 other mining districts. The Silver Creek model, he announced, has become the standard for mining communities throughout Colorado Territory. What began as an investigation into fraud has evolved into proof that cooperation between all peoples creates stronger, more prosperous communities than division ever could. The applause was thunderous, but I found myself thinking of those who weren't here to see this triumph. Caldwell and Vicky were serving their sentences in territorial prison, their names spoken only as cautionary tales. Clerk Williams had moved back east after his release, too ashamed to remain in the territory where his corruption had been exposed. Tom approached the podium next, his transformation from Caldwell's unwitting accomplice to community leader complete. The man who spoke now bore little resemblance to the confused, guilt-ridden son I'd confronted a year ago. My mother taught me that justice isn't about revenge, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the meadow. It's about restoring balance to the world. Today, we celebrate not just the defeat of corruption, but the birth of something better, a community where different peoples can work together for everyone's benefit. Standing Wolf rose from his place of honor and approached the podium with ceremonial dignity. In his weathered hands, he carried a beautifully crafted peace pipe, its stem decorated with symbols representing all the cultures of our valley. "In the old way," he said in English carefully chosen for the mixed crowd, "when great wrongs are made right, we smoke the pipe of harmony. Today, we smoke not just for peace between peoples, but for balance between the earth and those who live upon it." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything the Colorado Territory had ever seen. Anglo ranchers, Chinese merchants, Irish miners, German farmers, and Cheyenne elders passed the sacred pipe in a circle that seemed to encompass not just our community, but our hopes for the future. As evening fell and lanterns were lit throughout the festival grounds, Doc Martha found me sitting quietly on a hay bale, watching the celebration with a heart full of gratitude. "Tired?" she asked, settling beside me. "Content," I replied. "This is what James and I dreamed of when we built our ranch, not just a home, but a foundation for something larger. You've certainly achieved that. The territorial governor is talking about nominating you for the Medal of Territorial Service." I smiled at the thought. I think I'd prefer they just remember the lesson that when people stand together for what's right, no amount of money or power can defeat them. As the stars appeared over the Rocky Mountains, I felt a deep satisfaction settle in my bones. Justice had been served, not just in the courtroom, but in the transformation of an entire community. The Running Bear Ranch would always be my home, but its true legacy lay in proving that the American frontier could be a place where all peoples thrived together. The festival continued around us, but in that moment of quiet reflection, I knew that the real celebration was the life we'd built together, one where justice, respect, and cooperation had triumphed over greed, prejudice, and corruption. 2 years had passed since that morning when I discovered cut fence wires and sensed trouble approaching. Now, as I sat on the porch of the Running Bear Ranch watching the sunrise paint the Rocky Mountains in familiar shades of gold and rose, I marveled at how completely our world had transformed. Tom emerged from the barn, leading Duchess, now retired, to gentle pasture duty toward the water trough. My son had grown into the man his father always believed he could become: strong, honorable, and deeply committed to healing both the land and the relationships that Caldwell's greed had damaged. His work with the tribal elders had taught him patience, and his role in the Mining Safety Commission had given him purpose. "Morning, Ma," he called, his voice carrying the contentment of a man at peace with himself. "Standing Wolf is bringing his granddaughter by later. She wants to learn more about managing ranch accounts for her family's cattle operation." The sight of young Cheyenne women learning business skills that would help their people thrive in the changing world filled me with hope. This was the true victory, not just stopping corruption, but creating opportunities for all our children to build better futures together. Doc Martha's buggy appeared on the main trail, right on schedule for our weekly coffee and planning session. As the territorial government's consultant on mining community health, she traveled throughout Colorado now, but she always made time to return to Silver Creek, the place where we'd learned that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they stood together. "Catherine," she called as she climbed down from her buggy, "I have news from the governor's office. They want to establish a permanent Frontier Justice Institute here in Silver Creek, with you as the founding director." I laughed, shaking my head. "I'm a rancher, Martha, not an academic. You're a woman who proved that justice doesn't require a law degree or political connections, just courage, community support, and an unwillingness to accept injustice as inevitable." As we settled on the porch with our coffee, I found myself thinking about the lessons this experience had taught me. I'd learned that betrayal, even from those we love most, doesn't have to destroy us. It can strengthen our resolve to fight for what's right. I discovered that communities are strongest when they embrace diversity rather than fear it. Most importantly, I'd proven to myself that it's never too late to stand up and demand the respect we deserve. You know what I'm proudest of, I said to Martha as we watched Tom and Standing Wolf's granddaughter working with the horses. It's not that we defeated Caldwell or saved the ranch. It's that we created something that will outlast all of us, a community where children grow up believing that cooperation is stronger than competition, that justice is possible, and that every person's dignity matters. The wind carried the sound of children's laughter from the direction of town, where the school we'd built with restitution money taught lessons in 3 languages and honored the wisdom of all cultures. This was my true legacy, not just the Running Bear Ranch, but the proof that the American frontier could be a place where all peoples thrived together. As the sun climbed higher over the mountains, I felt James's presence in the morning breeze, his approval in the song of the meadowlarks, his love in the solid foundation we'd built together and I'd fought to preserve. The Running Bear Ranch would always be home, but its meaning had expanded beyond property lines to encompass an entire community's commitment to justice, respect, and hope for the future. And that, I knew, was a legacy worth any struggle.